When I was 16, my parents told me to leave home so they could have space for my sister's new baby. I felt abandoned and hurt, so I shared my feelings online. When my rich grandparents found out and threatened to take away my dad's inheritance, he pleaded with me to take down the post. I just turned 16 last week, but there was no celebration, not even a happy birthday from my parents. Instead, they told me I had to leave because my older sister, Amanda, who's 22 and pregnant, needed my room for her baby. It hurt because it felt like my parents cared more about her than me. They've never really shown much interest in me, but this was a new low. I didn't expect much from them, but this was really disappointing. They were dead serious when they told me I had to leave, so I didn't think they were joking or playing a prank. After they explained that they needed my room for the new baby and said I was old enough to move out, we sat there quietly for a while. They promised to keep covering my expenses until I turned 18 and make sure I had food and care, but they couldn't keep me living with them. I didn't want to argue, but I asked why they couldn't use the guest room for the nursery. They hesitated before saying they were using it for Amanda's boyfriend to stay over. To sum it up, my parents had their own room, my sister and her boyfriend had another, and the baby would get its own room. Amanda wasn't home, which seemed deliberate so she wouldn't feel guilty about me leaving. We weren't close because of the age gap, but we weren't mean to each other either. If she was okay with me leaving so she could have space for her baby and boyfriend, maybe she wasn't the sister I thought she was. It hurt, especially on my birthday, but I didn't argue and agreed to leave. At this point, I've come to terms with the fact that my parents won't change. No matter what I do, they won't love me the way I need them to. So when they told me to go live with my aunt, I went to my room and packed without protest. They helped, but I think it was just to speed things up. During the car ride to my aunt's, they chatted happily, but I was lost in my thoughts, staring out the window without saying much. When we arrived, they dropped me off without a hug or kiss goodbye. My aunt was genuinely happy to see me, and I felt welcomed in her home. I'd opened up to her about how hurt I was by my parents' actions. She was shocked and asked me to repeat what happened. After I did, her smile faded and she got serious. She didn't say anything to me but went to make a phone call in the other room. I heard her arguing loudly on the phone, which was unusual because she's usually very calm and quiet. Seeing my aunt so upset, I knew something serious had happened. She told me that my parents had made her angry. According to my dad, I had apparently suggested moving out to live with my aunt for the sake of the baby, and that I was perfectly fine with it. This was news to me. My aunt had agreed to take me in because she could see I wasn't happy living with my parents, and the idea of me suggesting it didn't seem strange to her. My dad tried to convince my aunt to take me in by saying it wouldn't be a big deal for her since she's single and doesn't plan on having a family. Having me there would be like having a roommate, and my dad would cover all my expenses. Thinking I was the one who suggested it, my aunt agreed. But now that she knew the truth, she called my dad to confront him. She was upset because what they did was wrong, and she needed to tell them so. After the call, both my aunt and I were upset. This situation was something I don't think many kids my age experience. I'd always knew my parents favored my sister, but this was extreme. They lied to my aunt to hide their actions because they knew how awful it was. They gave up the guest room for Amanda's boyfriend, who's in his 20s, has a job, and his own place. If they wanted to make room, Amanda could have easily moved in with him, but they wanted her clothes, even if it meant sacrificing my comfort. I was deeply hurt, so I decided to go online and expose what they'd done. I wasn't sure if my aunt would support me, so I waited until she left the room for a nap. Then I took out my phone, poured out my feelings, and posted everything without second thoughts. I didn't just talk about what happened that day, but also how my parents always treated me unfairly, making me feel like I didn't belong in my own home. I had a bit of a breakdown while writing, so the post was not just about exposing my parents, but also about expressing my emotions. After posting, I was in tears and turned off my phone, afraid of what might happen next. An hour later, I tried to distract myself with a book but couldn't focus. When my aunt woke up, she calmly asked if I had posted something, and I admitted that I had. There wasn't much discussion after that. When I turned on my phone, I saw that many family members had seen the post, and I had received texts from my parents and sister. Meanwhile, relatives had commented on the post, showing their support for me. It must have been comforting to receive supportive messages from some relatives during such a tough time. But going through your parents' messages sounds incredibly tough. It's awful that they responded with hate and anger, demanding you take the post down. Reading hurtful things like your dad wishing you'd never been born is incredibly painful, even if it's sadly unsurprising given the situation. It sounds like your mom's messages were similarly hurtful. It must have been challenging to see your sister's responses too. She didn't say much, but she wanted to talk to me in person if possible. I felt really overwhelmed by all the messages I had to answer, so I put my phone away and didn't talk to anyone for a couple of days. I decided to block my parents because I didn't want to talk to them anymore. I knew they had to keep sending me money until I turned 18, but besides that, I didn't see a reason to talk to them. My aunt was okay with my decision, and she didn't mention if my dad tried to reach her. We acted like nothing happened, so it seemed like she was on my side and supported what I did. I felt supported and didn't need anything else. For the past week, I barely talked to my parents. But today they showed up outside my school looking angry. My friends knew what was going on and came with me outside, kind of forming a barrier so I wouldn't have to talk to them if I didn't want to. But my parents kept calling my name, so I had to go over to them. I told them I didn't want anything to do with them, but they ignored me and insisted I come home with them right away. I couldn't understand why they suddenly wanted me back when they'd made it clear I wasn't a priority before. It felt like they were just trying to fix their reputation with family. So I asked them why they wanted me to come home, wanting to understand their sudden change. They seemed angry but still insisted I come back. They didn't want my friends to hear, so I asked for privacy. Once alone, they said they needed me back so they could get their inheritance since I wasn't answering their calls or texts. They explained that after I made the post, everyone in the family, including my grandparents, knew what was going on. My paternal grandparents, who have money, threatened my dad. They said if they didn't treat me better and reconcile with me, my dad would lose his inheritance. They were told if they didn't make things right with me, whatever my dad was supposed to inherit would go to my aunt, who was taking care of me even though she didn't have to. Losing the inheritance would be a big deal for my dad because it's a lot of money. They said that after my post, everyone in the family, including my grandparents, knew what happened. My paternal grandparents, who have money, threatened my dad. They said if they didn't treat me better, my dad would lose his inheritance. They were told if they didn't reconcile with me and take care of me, whatever my dad was supposed to inherit would go to my aunt, who was taking care of me even though she didn't have to. Losing the inheritance would be a big deal for my dad because it's a lot of money. My parents had a good income, but I understood why they were worried about losing the inheritance. If I were in their shoes, I might have felt the same way. But I would have been smarter about it. I wouldn't have made it seem like I was doing myself a favor by saying they'd take me back. It wasn't about me. It was about them protecting their money. And even then, they couldn't even act like they wanted me back. I told my parents I didn't care about their inheritance and walked away while they yelled at me to come back. I took the bus back to my aunt's house and told her what happened. She was also annoyed. To prevent this from happening again, she's talked to her lawyer so we can change my custody. Right now, my parents still have legal rights over me, but we're working on changing that so I can live with my aunt. I also called my grandparents to thank them for trying to help, but I made it clear I didn't want to go back to living with my parents. After spending a few days with my aunt, I felt free for the first time. Living with my parents had been suffocating, and I had hoped things would change, but they never did. My grandparents didn't live nearby, so we didn't see each other often. When we did, my parents acted nicely to hide how they treated me at home. It wasn't cruel treatment, but more like they ignored me. On the surface, everything seemed okay, but if anyone spent a few days at my parents' house, they'd see they mostly ignored me and focused on my sister. Things got worse after she got pregnant. I felt completely sidelined. I told my grandparents all of this, and they promised to help me live with my aunt if that's what I wanted. They said they'd take care of everything I needed if my parents gave up their rights. I felt relieved after our conversation, but it didn't last long because I received an email from my dad a few hours later. The email from my dad wasn't angry or hurtful, just disappointing. He said I didn't need to post what happened online because my grandparents would have found out anyway through my aunt. Now, not only are my grandparents mad at them, but they're also facing backlash from other relatives. He mentioned that even some of his coworkers found out because the post was public and he was tagged in it. He expressed that the situation wasn't good for him at work and that my actions had caused unnecessary drama in their lives. So I apologized for posting about how my parents asked me to leave on my 16th birthday to make room for my pregnant sister's baby. Update 1. First off, thank you everyone for your comments on my post. Your kind words mean a lot. Now some of you are wondering why I didn't leave my parents' house earlier and why I waited for them to ask me to go, especially when my grandparents and aunt were willing to help. The reason is, while I wasn't treated horribly, I felt ignored and unwanted. It's a form of mistreatment too, but for me, it was better than being treated badly. I had a place to live and food to eat, so I thought I was okay. I didn't realize I was being neglected because it felt normal to me. I didn't ask my family for help because I didn't want to bother them. I was also scared of what would happen if my parents found out. They care a lot about appearances, so I kept quiet and dealt with everything on my own. My aunt didn't offer to take me in because she didn't want to offend my parents, and she wasn't sure if I would want to live with her. But now that things have happened this way, it seems to be for the best. It's a bit late, but my aunt is working with a lawyer to get custody of me. Convincing my parents to give up their rights will be tough because of the inheritance issue. But I know my grandparents and aunt will support me, even if it goes to court. My aunt has been really sorry since I got here. She realized how neglected I was at home and feels bad for not talking to me earlier. At least things are clear now, and I feel better about the future. As for my sister, she texted me wanting to meet, but I didn't know what to say, so I ignored it. She's never been mean to me, just distant, like my parents. Even though she wasn't close to me, she was usually nice when we talked. I thought she was the one behind the idea of kicking me out so her boyfriend and child could live with her and our parents, so I was upset about that. I thought she'd start treating me badly now, so I didn't reply. Our relationship was tense, but I still liked her more than my parents because she was nice when we talked, and it wasn't her fault they favored her. When she texted me again 3 days ago asking to visit, I decided to call her and ask why. I wasn't expecting to visit her at home, assuming she'd want to meet at our parents' house. But she surprised me by saying she was staying with her boyfriend and wasn't feeling well enough to go out. She wanted to talk about our family issues, so I went out of curiosity. When I arrived, she apologized for not standing up for me against our parents favoring her. She knew they ignored my achievements to celebrate hers, and I always felt like the unwanted kid. But she never spoke up because she didn't feel comfortable, especially since I seemed okay with it. She realized it was wrong and wanted to make things right, so she apologized. She also said our parents hadn't talked to her about the living arrangement at all. She was shocked to learn they kicked me out to make room for the baby and her boyfriend because she didn't know about it. She never asked for this and had planned to live with our parents until the baby was older, then move in with her boyfriend. She wanted to leave earlier but stayed because our parents wanted her to. After my post, she realized things couldn't continue, so she moved out within a week. She had a big fight with our parents over leaving because they thought it was a bad decision. They weren't talking now because they accused her of being ungrateful and selfish, even though she never promised them anything. So all the drama was pointless, and now my parents lost both their kids. At least she apologized to me for not being a good sister, and I forgive her because holding on to grudges won't help. We talked it out, and she promised to be there for me from now on, just like my aunt did. That's a relief. It's been almost a week since my original post, and I haven't heard from my parents since the email. I guess they'd given up on trying to bring me back. I think my grandparents might have had something to do with it because they called to assure me that my parents wouldn't bother me anymore. I hadn't told them about the email, so I guess my parents and grandparents talked things out. I'm not sure what they discussed, but I think my parents have given up now. Update 2. It's only been 3 days since my last update, and today my aunt told me that my parents have agreed to give up their parental rights. The paperwork will be done soon, and she'll take over my custody. I have mixed feelings about it. I'm glad I'll finally have a home where I feel wanted, but I also feel empty and sad about some things. It feels strange that this is finally happening, but I know it's for the best. This is what I wanted. Update 3. Hey everyone. It's been a couple of weeks since my aunt became my legal guardian, which is great. I recently learned that my parents only gave up custody because my grandparents told them they'd lose their inheritance unless they agreed. They could either keep 50% of it and give up my custody or lose it all. I guess you know what they chose. Haha, I'm not even surprised anymore. At this point, I couldn't care less because it feels like I dodged a bullet. Good riddance to them. I'm still talking to my sister though. My parents are trying to make up with her before her due date, but she wants some space right now. She told them to stop bothering her every day. I can't help but laugh at how much of a mess they've made of their own family. But hey, I'm happy with my aunt, and that's what counts.